Let me start, of course, first by acknowledging that we are meeting tonight on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations and pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. And also acknowledge that we at Deakin University, for the last 10 years, we've been organizing and hosting these initiatives of having iftar dinners. On a couple of occasions, we had 8 celebrations too. I think 2021 would have been the 11th, but it is the 10th because we skipped 2020. And you would have seen that there are some modifications we did to reflect really the context and the situation through which we are all going, which is the COVID situation. So we've reduced numbers, but also we made sure that the arrangement, the seating arrangement, are really as abiding by the guidelines as much as we could. I want to start by sharing with you a few words about Ramadan and why we do this with the Australian Intercultural Society. And of course, I know that there are many dignitaries with us tonight, many important people who have joined us from community, from government, from academia, and from other sectors of society. And I will ask the Vice Chancellor later on to come in and deliver his speech, and he will acknowledge formally all of those people. But welcome to all of you to this iftar dinner. Ramadan is the 9th month in the Islamic lunar calendar. And the reason why it is a very, very important month, is the most important month in the Islamic lunar calendar, it's precisely because it is the month during which the Quran was revealed to the Prophet. On the 27th night of Ramadan, that's the first divine revelations to the Prophet. And the first word that was revealed to the Prophet, peace be upon him, was the word Iqra. It's an instruction to read. And of course, that's not really, it doesn't kind of escape us that we are meeting tonight at an iftar dinner organized by a leading teaching and research institution. So the emphasis, the directive to pursue knowledge and learning is extremely important for the Muslim community and for Islam as a faith. Islam, of course, as a global religion, is a religion of 1.6 billion people, believers. In Australia, we have about over 600,000 Muslim Australians, or 2.6% of the population. What makes the Islam in general, if you like, a very interesting global phenomenon to look at is that in every single corner of the earth where there are people who believe in Islam, they bring to Islam their own local culture. So that diversity of local cultures, intermingling with the core aspects and dimensions of the faith, is what brings richness to Islam, but also what brings a level of, if you like, respect and tolerance towards difference in its own right. There is one thing that Muslims always invoke when they talk about Ramadan, which is a verse from the Quran which says, "All you who believe, fasting has been prescribed upon you as it has been prescribed upon those who came before you." And what I really like about this verse is the notion those who came before you. And those who came before Muslims are not Muslims, if you think about it. Those who came before Muslims are other people of faith traditions, of the Abrahamic faiths, whether Christians or Jewish or other even religions that existed. That continuity of the theological, if you like, connections between the three faiths and other faiths is really what we should be focusing on. Not so much what's been always talked about in terms of differences. But I like to always in these reflections think about why is Ramadan such an important aspect of the calendar of so many people. There are the spiritual foundations, of course, because fasting brings you closer to God. And fasting allows you to discover that closeness and the mercy of the Creator. There are the social meanings or dimensions of Ramadan, in particular in relation to people learning to self-control, self-restrain. You know that you can drink and eat anytime, but you don't do it. You know that there are certain things that you're not allowed to do and you don't do it. So that capability, if you like, to be able to go through that is very, very important. But also, the fact that you abstain from all sorts of good things means that you're able to identify with those who do not have the means to eat, even if they're allowed to eat and they can eat. So that notion of solidarity, experiencing what people who do not have access to means are able to to have access to. And of course, there are the intercultural dimensions of Ramadan, and this is a very good example of it. So in Ramadan, it's really about opening your household, it's about opening your mind, it's about opening the way you look at things, it's about sharing, it's also about inviting the stranger, even if you don't know them. You invite the stranger into your house to share in the meal, and this is really the spirit and the ethics of the message of Ramadan. And I think it's the reason also why now increasingly, and I'm sure we will discuss this in the panel later on, there is a renewed discovery that when specific communities are actually engaged in spiritual endeavors and celebrating or practicing aspects of their faith, that doesn't really exclude, doesn't close the doors off in terms of others being able to experience and understand what they're going through. And this is really what I think Ramadan is able to offer all of us in terms of these interfaith, intercultural connections and understanding. And I think we live in a multicultural society, interfaith society in many ways, that includes religious, even non-religious denominations. And the capacity to be able to have this respect towards that difference is absolutely essential to the multicultural ethos. Looking at my time, as you can see, it's because breaking the fast comes at specific minutes of the day. So it's, I think, 5:32 today. It's only 5:31 now. I'm not going to keep talking till we break the fast. But what I will do is, we normally have someone who, actually it is 32 now, so it is time to break fast. We normally break fast by hearing the adhan delivered by someone, and we had organized for Mr. Isa Bajarwa, but he's not with us. We're very lucky indeed because we have a previous friend. Isa, you right? You right. So you can join us now, Isa, and deliver the adhan, please.
Which was the
Qibla, I think. Ahmed, do you know what Qibla?
I think that's right.
But
I think this way. Yeah.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
Thank you very much. And it is time now to break fast. For those who are wishing to perform the prayers, Lauren is upstairs. So there's a venue upstairs for those who wish to perform the prayers. Otherwise, you can break your fast and all three will be served.
I know I'm interrupting a few of you finishing your starter. I do apologise. I'm Ian Martin, and it is absolutely a privilege for me to be Deakin University's Vice-Chancellor and to welcome you here to Deakin Downtown today. This is, I think, almost the first formal university function we've done here for over a year, so it is truly great to have all of you with us tonight. In opening, I absolutely want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we are gathered here tonight, the Wurundjeri and Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nations. They are the traditional custodians of the land on which we are gathered, and I think in the context of tonight, let's remember there is one really important intercultural piece for Australia, which is the intercultural piece between our First Nations and everybody else. 233 years ago, two cultures collided. We're still feeling the pain of that collision, and I think it's our duty, everybody's duty, to walk forward and make sure that we shape a history for Australia that brings those two cultures together. Thank you so much for joining us. There are some acknowledgements, and I'm going to read them out now. So we've got Mr. Ahmet Keskin, Executive Director of the Australian Intercultural Society. Ahmet, it's a great pleasure to welcome you here. Mr. Neil Angus, MP, who's the Shadow Minister for Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs. Mr. Frank Maguire, MP. Diana Pereira, who's the Consul for the Sri Lankan Foreign Service. Welcome, Diana, the country with which Deakin has very fond associations. Mr. Roland Jabor, OAM, Honorary Consulate General for the Kingdom of Morocco. Mr. Arshad Fazeen, the President of the Deakin University Islamic Society. Professor Fethi Mansouri, who is the Director of our Alfred Deakin Institute and is our Master of Ceremonies this evening. Mr. Isa Bajawari, who's the member of the Deakin University Islamic Society, for his wonderful Quran recital this evening. Thank you so much indeed. We also have four fantastic panel members with us this evening. Both welcome and thank you for giving up the time to join us. Hana Assafiri, OAM, the Reverend Professor Tim Costello, AO, Rabbi Gabay Kautman, and also we have with us tonight Zainab Farrar, who will give us a spoken word presentation. But I'm absolutely delighted that Deakin can host this event this evening in partnership with the Australian Intercultural Society. This is certainly the first time I've had the privilege of doing it as VC. I hope it's absolutely not the last. The Australian Intercultural Society has been enormously effective in establishing and promoting intercultural dialogue, social harmony and cohesion in Australia's exceedingly diverse multicultural communities. There is a few communities in Australia that are not diverse in at least 2 or 3 dimensions, and we have to remember on that. In opening, I'm drawn to reflect on the name, intercultural. It's not a way that we think about things very often, but it speaks to intersections and joins between cultures. In my university world, there is no doubt that some of the greatest advances comes from work occurring at those boundaries, at those intersections. But in the world of engineering, those intersections can be both your greatest strength and your greatest weakness, and unless designed and managed well, are the source of stress and fractures. And so it is for our cultures. Our greatest strengths and advances have so often come from intersections, but at the same time, those very same intersections have produced humanity's greatest failures, and reflecting on that is sobering. For a number of years now, the annual Iftar Dinner at Deakin, and as Pethi has said, 10 years, it would have been 11 if 2020 hadn't happened, has played a hugely important role in bringing together people of different faiths and cultures in a spirit of peace, tolerance and mutual respect. In our world today, we so often see examples of cultural and religious difference as a cause for hostility and violence. Atrocities preceded by incitement to violence so often originates in thought and speech, targeting particular communities for no other reason than some unknown identity. One of the great contradictions and challenges of the human race is that we are, on one level, extraordinarily community-based and community-facing. You only need to look at what everybody recognised that we'd lost in coming together during 2020 to recognise that. We thrive on cooperation and trust, and there is nothing more fantastic than sitting around a table over dinner and listening to great conversations. But we have that other side, that irresistible sense of tribalism, that motivates us to side with one group over the other. In many ways, that can bring great benefit to society. And Victoria, when it comes to sport, is possibly the most tribal community in the world. And I won't even go there in terms of AFL, because there is no win in taking that path. Some of our greatest achievements and finest moments, however, despite that tribalism, have come as a result of shared understanding and a common cause. But at the same time, some of the worst moments came from hate and division. There is no doubt that over the last few years, a spirit of cooperation and a shared journey has been, in so many corners of society, amplified. It gives us huge cause for optimism that those conversations can take place, gatherings like tonight can take place, if we can truly harness the power of diversity. And I genuinely believe there is huge power in that diversity. We've seen this expressed with renewed aspirations to return to the moon, go further to Mars, but perhaps most importantly, in global commitments and efforts to address global climate change. After all, the one thing that binds everybody together is we have but one planet to play with. Our response to COVID has not been perfect, but again, global collaboration across cultures has done things that we never thought would be possible. A year ago, we never thought we'd get to a COVID vaccine within 12 months, but open sharing, learning, working together has delivered that. Now, I know that there are problems with intellectual property and everything else, but it still is an absolute triumph of human endeavour to get to that point within a year. In the past, many of those endeavours were national endeavours. They were cause for national pride. But increasingly, the challenges we face and the opportunities we have demand a multi-nation, a multicultural, an intercultural approach. We, as humanity, are absolutely reliant on that working, because if we don't, by the time we get to our great-grandchildren, we are going to have so stuffed it up, it is unbelievable. The old problems, the simple reversion to tribal thinking, is not going to get us there. We need to come together, we need to benefit from those differences in our cultures, work at the intersections in the great ways that are possible, not at the wrong ways. That's why I like intercultural over multicultural. The challenge, and we saw this a lot when I was growing up in Europe in the 70s and 80s, was multicultural was translated into, let's put everybody into some glorious mixer and morph everybody into something that's got a little bit of everybody else's culture in it, and we'll all live very, very nicely together. It didn't work, and actually it's a pretty uninspiring vision to have for humanity in the world. There is no doubt that diversity brings strength and new opportunities. Let's not forget that just about everything that we touch in our lives is there now because of a blend of advances from many parts of the world. We've heard people talk, and rightly so, about the importance of the Enlightenment and giving us liberal democracy and the philosophers, not taking that away. But let's remember, the very language we speak now, it's tarred with the name English, but that's just a fusion of many, many languages. Lots of words we use come from India, they come from the Commonwealth, they come from Malaysia, they're fused in there. It is truly an intercultural language, and we need to celebrate that more, but remember where things came from. We have a number system that came from India and Arabia. There are so many examples of this that you can't take it away. Diversity brings strength. These iftar dinners are an absolute wonderful opportunity to make sure that we do our little bit to nurture a better understanding of the cultural, linguistic and religious diversity that enriches our immediate communities, the communities beyond, and communities right the way across this country and beyond. It gives us a space where we can come together to explore similarities, but most importantly, challenge stereotypes, build relationships, and come together to help deliver a shared vision of what could be safer, what could be better, what could be more hopeful, what could be more optimistic for the country we live in, the state we live in, the world we live in. There is no doubt that for many in the world at the moment, things are not easy. And it would be remiss of me not to reflect on the fact that in India, there are millions and millions and millions of Muslims celebrating Ramadan in the most discomforting and heartbreaking of circumstances, and certainly my thoughts are with them and all of their Indian brothers and sisters at the moment. Deacon's relationship with India has been so important for more than a quarter of a century, and it is so hard to look and see what's happening there. My real first exposure to the joys of intercultural activity was as 3 months as a medical student in Uttar Pradesh. Now, for those of you who know India, Uttar Pradesh in the 1980s was an interesting place to be because it wasn't exactly peaceful and harmonious between the Hindus and the Muslims. But what I saw in the small village/town I was in was actually, on a day-to-day level, people just got on with it. They saw the strengths that each of those communities brought. They saw the opportunity to work together and live together and benefit from each other. And it was absolutely sad to see how that, when it got to a bigger stage, motivated by one or two people wishing to stir up hysteria, could change that wonderful rich mix into something it should not be. From that day on, it does colour you as a 20-year-old medical student seeing that, but it was really, really important and shaping for me. This is a wonderful evening. I'm so proud of our university putting this on. I'm so pleased that so many wonderful guests could join us. Thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoy the dinner and most importantly enjoy the conversations. Ramadan Mubarak.
I don't need to really read the bios or introduce them to you. Most of you are very familiar with the work that this very distinguished panel have been doing in the community for so long. But just very, very briefly, Hana Assafiri, of course, runs the Moroccan Sultan, a strong advocate for enhancing the status of women of color in general, Muslim women included. A very successful entrepreneur, cultural, if you like, disruptor, par excellence, really, really active in the community and a voice that should be heard and needs to be heard in relation to many contemporary issues in our multicultural society. The Reverend Tim Costello, I don't think I need to introduce him to many people, but a Baptist minister, very well known social activist, has worked, of course, for many, many years on problems related to gambling in particular, but also been the Chief Executive Officer for World Vision Australia for 12 years, from 2004 to 2016. And Rabbi Gabby Coltman is at the ARC Center, Jewish Community Center, really been active for many years now, using dialogue in particular as an inclusive approach to Judaism. Very successful in being part of the interfaith dialogues in particular, but also really pursuing the ethos of inclusive conversations in general. So a very distinguished panel. When I talked to Ahmed about the design of the keynote or the panel, we normally alternate between keynotes or panel conversations. And we decided that because of the COVID situation and because of the many, challenges that have either been exposed or amplified, or in many cases exacerbated by COVID, we thought perhaps the key anchoring kind of framing question to our panelists, and I've asked all of them to speak maybe 3 to 4 minutes each, then we'll go into some reflections and reactions and questions, is to think about the notion of giving. COVID has really unmasked a lot of deep structural inequalities in our society, has really shown the extent to which that whether within communities or within the global community, we still have a massive challenge of overcoming a lot of those inequalities, structural inequalities, but also in many cases interpersonal challenges in terms of meeting basic needs. So I thought to reflect from your respective perspectives. Obviously, I don't need to tell you that we also have an interfaith perspective too, on how you experienced, but how you saw also some of these challenges being either responded to or in some cases overcome within our society from their respective experiences. So we'll start with Hana. I'll give you, you should have a microphone, I'll give you mine.
I'll take it. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, given that it is an interfaith event and it is Ramadan Kareem to you all. And look, just echoing the acknowledgement to First Nations, I think no event for me whose conversation is founded on justice and whose conversation is founded on the endeavour to find peace can ignore the lived reality for First Nations people. No matter our causes, we're all tussling with many. As Muslims, we're dealing with, the impact and effect of Islamophobia. As women, we're dealing with sexism, those that are advocating for asylum seekers and the climate. So there's a number of causes around social justice, but they all had on these lands that have not been ceded, lands where we find ourselves in the only democratic Commonwealth country in the world without a treaty with First Nations people. Yes, we preface every event importantly and symbolically with acknowledgement of country. Yet what we need to do is not only tip that into behavioural change, where we become allies in this conversation, no matter our causes. And only then can we arrive at a place truly worthy of celebrating and truly worthy of conversations, particularly which are centred on and founded on peace. So with that said, we are proudly allies to a conversation, and certainly with local Wurundjeri women, in our quest that we continue to raise these conversations and find better ways of being allies and making familiar and commonplace these conversations. Certainly not as attacks and accusations, but rather bringing them into the day-to-day conversation and not having the business separate to the acknowledgement, but rather the acknowledgement and peace for First Nations being the business. So with that said, thank you for having me, and thank you to the organisers, Deakin Uni, Ahmed, and the Intercultural Society. So for me, when I was asked, firstly I thought, could you not find anybody else? Okay. As a Muslim woman who has reclaimed Islam and reclaimed an understanding of Islam in a way that is more learned, and I think when you opened earlier, one of the first foundational requirements of Islam is knowledge. So I came into Islam, though I was born a Muslim, I certainly came into Islam having studied and learned Islamic history, Islamic philosophy, and then kind of posed the question about the departure from those values by most Muslim countries, sad to say. As is the departure from the hallmarks of Western democracies by most Western democracies. So this is not just an attack on the Muslim world. Certainly we have departed from conversations around how do we find peace, how do we find harmony, how do we find and advocate and navigate a pathway through our societies to a place that is more harmonious. COVID certainly highlighted that for us, and the concept of giving, for me, is interrelated and foundational to Islam. Islam, and I think it's important, Islam, in my understanding and expression of it, is founded on human rights, social justice, recalibrated a society where equity was achieved through responsibility. Generosity and giving is the vehicle with which to arrive at that place. It's not a discretionary extra, do I feel like giving, as part of and an expression of our faith, as is prayer, as is Ramadan, and Ramadan gives us the occasion to transcend the immediate need for gratification. But giving and generosity form part of, not just the tangible, I will give you what I have and share what I have and a percentage of it, but giving in tolerance, giving in compassion and empathy, giving as a way of life for a Muslim and our expression of the world. Yet sadly, that is not much on offer, not only not in the Muslim world, but certainly not in the world at large. At the moment, we were having a conversation earlier about we are tribal, and we seem to want to stick to each tribe. And whenever there are external tensions, that we become more tribal. Well, for me, the issue isn't that we are or are not tribal. The issue is, are we open and curious? And are we creating the conditions to be open, curious, kind, tolerant? And those are the values that don't seem to have much currency. Certainly in this government's economic recovery post-COVID. These causes have made a little bit of inroads. We began to talk about women and violence against women. We began to talk about Islamophobia and the groups on the margins and homophobia. Yet COVID happened, and it seems all those causes no longer matter. We're simply just talking about economic recovery. Now, unless we can preserve and safeguard, uncompromisingly so, these values, then economic recovery will only be for the few. I'm happy to talk a bit later about what we've done about it, but that is just the premise which has helped us navigate how we've reinvented our business, the Moroccan Soup Bar, and our engagement with our community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah. Over to you, Tim. Over to you.
Over to me, yes. I was just checking what the theme was. Giving, thank you, yeah. Let me just say it's an absolute honour to be at an Iftar dinner, and thank you for hosting me. And in some ways, this is a really a parable of what the monotheistic faiths, but all others, should enjoy. Their sense of hospitality, of your knees under a table, each person with a name tag, whoever you are, whatever your religion, wherever you come from and your background, this really is a picture of that age to come. So it's lovely being here and being part of the warmth of this. Now on giving, I missed the memo, but I was doing some radio in Perth, 6PR. Liam Bartlett, he's on 60 Minutes, he's on radio in Perth. And the theme was, are our top 500, Fortune 500, or the equivalent, the very rich Australians, giving enough? Gina Reinhardt, and there'd been a list published. And I, in the course of that conversation, said, you know, my father, who was a teacher all his life, he never earned more than $70,000 a year, but he always gave 10% of his pre-tax salary away. And I've continued that practice. And Liam Bartlett nearly had a heart attack on the other end of the phone. He said, "Did you say 10%? I said 10%. He said, 10%? I said, yes. Because he'd worked out that the very rich were giving far less than that, actually. And I went on to say, you know, when I was CEO of World Vision for 13 years, we would do by postcodes the giving, who sponsored a child. And one of the stunning discoveries we made was the poorer postcodes gave far more than the richer postcodes. Those people closest to poverty, with the empathy of saying, I know what that's like. I know the panic of not being able to buy my kids presents, absolutely opened up that sense of, and I'm blessed, and even if I'm pretty poor on a fixed income, I can do something. I remember coming back from a Nepal earthquake and being quite overwhelmed that people who were homeless, some were in caravan parks, but otherwise homeless, out in Narre Warren, had banded together, seen the news about the Nepali earthquake, and given a donation of $1,500. Homeless people. So my sense is that the monotheistic faiths have always had that formation that said, you don't look up and say, someone's doing better than me, I have to hold on to my money. If anything, you look down and you go, that person's struggling and I'm blessed, and I can teach my kids gratitude, which is, I think, the finest human instinct, that they're blessed and they can give, and it's others that actually matter, and the byproduct of that is you do find happiness. When it comes to COVID, you mentioned that. Look, I think COVID has just been another opportunity for the world to actually learn a lesson that we're struggling to learn, namely that we are all utterly interdependent, equally vulnerable. We are connected by an invisible virus. So Micah Australia, which I now run, that's all the faith-based charities, and I might say and I'm sure it's true of Muslims and Jews, but we have the figures that something like 60% of the giving to the big international charities in Australia comes from about 10% of the population, and they're largely religious. That 10% tithing idea has been lost. This is quite extraordinary. Anyway, COVID taught us that we are interdependent. So Micah ran a campaign saying, end COVID for all. 200 CEOs we had sign a full page in the Fin Review, from Islamic Relief to Hillsong. The AMA and CEO of Woolworths, Business Council of Australia, saying our borders might be shut but our hearts aren't shut. And I was really impressed. The federal government, hasn't been well publicised over the COVID period, has increased aid by $1 billion. You might have missed that. There was a reason you might have missed it. I'll tell you later if you want to ask me the question. But this has been a magnificent result of the End COVID for All campaign. Investing in the fragile health systems of our near neighbours, both the Pacific and Southeast Asia, on vaccines, they have seriously stepped up. And when I think about that, one of the reasons we're able to advocate, I went and saw the Prime Minister a number of times, the Aid Minister, the Foreign Minister, they actually understood that religious people had real skin in the game. They weren't just pointing a finger and saying, you ought to, you must. We were able to show them the figures of religious people and what they give. That tithing 10% idea. And many were quite blown away. I remember the Aid Minister saying to me when they actually announced an increase and expected a pushback from the nativists, how dare you spend money on others, COVID's raging here. The Aid Minister said, we didn't get that response for the first time, Tim, why? And I said, you know, I think most Australians feel blessed that we've dodged a bullet. They don't begrudge helping our nearest neighbours. And he said, wow, yeah. Now, whether that will continue, I don't know. But I'm very proud of what, not just religious, we had all organisations in the Fin Review, but particularly religious, out of their own practice of giving, have been able to do with the government.
Thank you very much, Tim.
Assalamu alaikum, Ramadan Mubarak to everybody, and thank you, Ahmed and Intercultural Society, for having me here tonight. And don't hate me for it, but I want you to think about a little over a year ago, when things were shutting down, and we went into lockdown for the first time, and my mobile was going gangbusters. I have a community out in East Hawthorne with about 200 families, and the steady stream of calls, parents that were doing it tough, homeschooling their children, losing job loss, and just issues all around. And I was sitting at my house with my little kids running around, locked up, and just chatting to people day in, day out. And the synagogue had shut down. We employ a chef to offer kosher meals around the area. My wife's grandparents, one set on the West Coast and the other set on the East Coast of the United States, had both contracted COVID-19. The WhatsApps from the family were coming with minute-by-minute reports. Her grandfather on a ventilator. And I'm like to myself, we have to do something, and we have to do something special. As I mentioned, we had the chef, and we have a commercial kitchen, and I called him up and I said, we're starting a program, and we are going to offer food, not just to the Jewish community, but to all Victorians. And we're going to call it the ARC Centre's Pay It Forward program. We're getting into the kitchen tomorrow. I'm coming in. Let's rock and roll. And we did that. And I've never seen my community mobilise like they did. I can barely get them to the door through the high holidays. It's not the Caulfield crowd. It's the East Hawthorne crowd, you know. We're culturally Rabbi Jewish, but, you know, synagogue, maybe once a year. And it was absolutely incredible to watch them come together. The food that was being sent out, that was being made, and, you know, it wasn't the Meals on Wheels sort of food. It was, we wanted people to have an experience, people that we knew that had lost their jobs, that were dealing with serious mental health issues, or just needed a little bit of reprieve, just needed a night off from cooking. And community members are saying to other community members that they know via text message or a phone call that are doing it tough. It got so large that our local member of parliament started directing traffic. Rabbi, I need here, I need here, I need here, this person can't go to Coles. And it's still going to this day. It's not as busy as it was, but the community knew that something needed to be done. We needed to give. And I'm just going to add on to what you both were saying, is philanthropy, giving. We need to educate our children in schools the art of giving, because when we give, we don't just make an impact on somebody else, we impact ultimately ourselves. I remember growing up, and there was a charity box in the house. Going to school with 5 and 10 cent coins. I would go with my mother to the bank. Well, that's not really happening anymore, is it? Closed down. But ultimately, I'm still collecting coins to send with my son to his school. So every morning, he, together with his class, can give just a coin. And that will instill upon him, yes, comes from the Old Testament, the tithing, doesn't it? I'll claim that one as well. I'll claim that one as well. We did. But we're happy to share. We are. We do. There are commonalities up here, ladies and gentlemen. Many of them. As I say, there's a lot more than other things. But ultimately, it's on us to educate and to lead the way at whatever you can. It's onus, whether you're religious, whether you're secular, ultimately making a difference to somebody else. And I'm proud to have done that with my community and to continue to do that. But we need to see more of it. And we are a charitable bunch, Australians. We really, really are. We do give, but we can give a lot more.
Thank you very much, all three of you. I think that there are certainly common themes and kind of interconnected issues that you've highlighted. My question, and then I'll open up for the floor, is: do you think that some of the creative work that's been done during COVID-19 to really respond to a situation, as Gabby has just referred to, which was absolutely out of control, do you think that that work perhaps should be something that becomes more of a permanent feature of civil society activity and advocacy and work in that space, well beyond COVID-19? Because what COVID-19 did is shown us the problems that we have, but those problems will not disappear once COVID is under control.
I think COVID brought out the best of humanity in the main, and sadly, some of the worst. But we are a people that are absolutely grateful, and gratitude is also foundational. And with that said, I guess we also did a pay forward campaign, and for us it was about casting our minds back. We thought the devastation that was unfolding around the world, that we would see that devastation, and really early on we had no idea where information was coming from. There was a lot of noise, you didn't know who to trust. States and governments were kind of giving mixed messaging, and in particular marginalised communities and specifically Muslims, who have been the recipients of distrust from governments, found very little clear channels of information in knowing where to get that information. So for us as a business whose focus is to employ and support and circuit break disadvantage for women and Muslim women in particular, whilst pre-COVID, supporting and enabling and empowering women meant keeping them at work. During COVID meant keeping them home. And we did that before we were signalled to by governments. But at the same time, we tried to think about, and again, I talk about giving as a multi-layered concept rather than just tangible giving. That yes, it's about tolerance, it's about extending our resources, whatever they be, and sometimes it's simply compassion and support and sitting next to somebody who's struggling rather than just giving material things. But we thought, and we certainly put together a pay forward campaign to feed the healthcare workers of Victoria, because what we were thinking would happen, the devastation, is that we would all be lining up to see who received a service from which hospital. And thankfully that did not eventuate. But the Pay Forward campaign was endorsed and supported by community, and community absolutely. The dear old pensioners, and when you say those whose means are less than those that are better off, that is absolutely true. But then that campaign began to lag. You know, the dear old pensioner paid twice and 3 times. But there was, the momentum began to lag. And then we saw contribution from corporations, and not one came through, not one. Not one. Banks, super funds, all those institutions that we have supported over the years, not one came through. So we decided, as only women can, to not be defined by the crisis, but rather reinvent, and reinvent in a way that used this crisis as an opportunity. And to your point, can we continue the legacy of giving through and post-COVID? Absolutely. So our legacy at the moment is, and when I tie it back to being in partners with First Nations people. So we have a campaign as part of dining at the Moroccan soup bar. Yes, it's weird, and you get bread with it occasionally. But part of the campaign is symbolically $1 a diner. And it's an invitation for diners to engage with the conversation, and it goes towards pay the rent campaigns for First Nations people. People are readily, they're just seeking platforms to express generosity. And I think now's the time to innovate, to be unconventional, and to also preserve the vision of the world that we all want. So yes, we can keep the legacy of giving alive.
So the answer is yes.
Yes, the answer is yes.
The answer is yes.
So some called the COVID lockdown period the kindness pandemic. Neighbours in streets who could zoom around the world but didn't know their neighbours discovered each other and started dropping a meal and saying, "You're elderly, I'll get you medicine." And like mosques and synagogues, churches right across the nation literally turned into drop-in centre supermarkets where people could go and get food. And one of the insights was, because we're connected by an invisible virus, actually those people that were homeless, if we leave them homeless, could infect us. And overnight we found we could put them in hotels and we could solve some of what we said was an insoluble problem. And I'm very proud that Frank, your government has stepped up with social housing, a $5 billion package. I think that in some ways is a consequence of us going, the penny dropped. The question, of course, is always, and this happens in religious and secular communities because of tribalism, the world globally has been re-tribalising, who is the us? Who does it actually include? Churches, mosques, synagogues, others were feeding those who are on TPVs or asylum seekers. We were saying, well, international students, you better go home. If you didn't go home, well, sorry, you don't quite get a job seeker. You're not quite in the us. We're having a curious version of that right at the moment. We always sort of understood we'd turn back folks, say no to refugees and asylum seekers because you're not citizens and we'll decide who will come here. Now we're leaving our own citizens in India. The one thing citizenship gives you, fundamentally gives you, is the right in war or trouble to come home and potentially locking you up for trying to. But this debate about who is the us will go on. The potential to snap back to old categories is there. I'm hoping that kindness pandemic translates into practice and into government policy I think that's at least the opportunity. Look, there's a high road and a low road. We're probably at the fork of that road, not quite sure which road we're going to take, but I'm hoping it will be the high road.
I'll tell you something, you both might appreciate it. So just the other day I was back in the classroom, and I teach at Bialik College Jewish prayer, skill set to it. And I walk into a classroom of Year 7s and I go, "Who runs the world?" And before I could answer, "God," every female in the room said, "Women!" There you go. So it's coming around. But I absolutely do think that this kindness, this giving, it will continue. It was very reactionary. You know, people were looking to assist. People didn't know what to do, and you know, it seems like we all gave them that vessel. I'm finding it now, it's harder to connect with the community now that the routine has been broken. People aren't as needy. They're enjoying, instead of coming to synagogue on a Saturday morning, sitting at their local coffee or going from a walk. So that element, and I've spoken to other faith leaders that are also struggling with constituents, really getting them back through the door, but ultimately we're enjoying where we are right now. And it's just about continuously reminding your community on a macro and a micro level of what it's all about. And don't forget what we all went through as a group. And as a faith leader, I think that's my job, because people get back and go back straight away. And look at us. Look, we're all here tonight. Masks, we're all without masks, we're all very happy to be in the room together celebrating Ramadan. But ultimately, it was just a bad dream so long ago. And we mustn't forget how we banded together, and we must be creative and give people that opportunity over and over again to give. And that's my job, and I'm sure the two of you will also.
Thank you. Thank you for that. We do have only a couple of minutes. If there are really any burning questions, or perhaps any reflections or comments from you. Reverend.
Thank you. Thank you. I just want to reflect on what you've been saying about charity. Unfortunately, I live in the environment that I'm working with many of them. The problem in that charity we're talking now, the giving and the takers are becoming the king and the servant in a way. People are not feeling empowered by just getting. How do we give them a leg for themselves to walk? And to be part of the giver rather than always part of the receiver. In Ramadan, as Hana mentioned, I know a lot of my friends, charity in Ramadan is something that everyone does. We have sadaqah, we have Ramadan stuff, and so many things. But what I see is, in fact, what religion says is, what your right hand gives, your left hand should not know. But we always make it very prominent. And unfortunately, I come from that continent that always receives and always looks like, you know, in our TV screens that shows us that these are always beggars. These are always kids who flies. So when is that time that we need to think that charity is not a sort of empowering the giver, but empowering the receiver as well? Thank you.
Anyone wants to take it as a comment?
I'll be really quick. I absolutely agree. I don't agree with charity at all. I agree with providing the means to enable and support so that people can champion and have their own causes and have various options that they didn't have before we came to them. I mean, that's certainly the model that we run for women in terms of employment, and it's the model we run in engaging communities. Giving for the sake of giving makes us feel better about ourselves, but giving to enable others to make decisions is hopefully the quest of what we try and do, and that is consistent with Islamic values.
Can I say I do believe in charity? Charity is the old English word for love, and when people say I don't believe in charity, I feel like saying you don't want love. I know where you're coming from, Abraham, and it's a tricky dance. At one level you're coming from, and a famous theologian, Niebuhr, put it this way: when the rich give charity, it's a demonstration of their power and their pity. And there's many who give with that attitude. It's not by and large the people in the poor postcodes actually sponsoring a child in Africa who will die before the age of 5 without that hope. You're also saying it can create dependence, and people do need to take personal responsibility. When people say, I want justice, not charity, I'm largely on their side. But this side of the kingdom of God, justice is unlikely to ever quite get there, and we're going to need love and giving and care. So I am a believer in charity, but there are traps. We actually just have to stay aware of the dynamics.
Thank you for that. Let me hope for a question from a female colleague now, a woman. There you go. Since we...
Thank you very much, all the panelists. This was an amazing interfaith dialogue and interfaith discussion about giving. My question is about what each one of you think of migrant communities and refugees giving back to their communities outside Australia, giving outside Australia. Because we know that most of the people in Syria, in Yemen, they rely on income to put food on the table from people who live outside in Canada and the US and Australia. So that kind of giving, isn't it, when they weigh the advantages and you know, when they look at their life here and the life of the homeless person here is way better than the life of a Yemeni child or a Syrian family. So how do you look at that, and you know, which one is better than the other, if I can put it this way?
Probably Tim, you're best placed.
Yeah, look, it's both and. Remittances are larger than Australian aid. So the giving by people working here back home is incredibly important for rebuilding. But it's a little bit hit and miss. If you're lucky enough to have a job here and have made it here and have family there, your family's going to, thankfully, have an eased existence. Of course, there are so many in the same countries who don't have family in foreign countries able to send remittances. It's a bit like the Indigenous stuff, and I agree with what Hannah's been saying. If you were lucky enough as an Indigenous group to, on your land title, also have minerals, you get a whole lot of money and royalties poured in. There's lots of Indigenous land that doesn't have minerals. It's very hit and miss. So I think it's both and. Remittances are really important to go back home, and it's an expression of family and responsibility, but it's not a comprehensive way to do it either. So many miss out.
I guess Islam recognizes Inna lillah milk as-samawati wal ard, which simply means that we own nothing. And we are simply, life is transient, we're passing through this life, and it is through us that certain resources are at our disposal. With that, in Islam, is a requirement that we take responsibility for creating a sense of equity. And with that giving, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't say if you come from Sudan, you are not entitled to any resources from Australia. These are man-made concepts, and these are man-made rules and regulations about where you can send your money and all that sort of stuff. When I was saying earlier about charity versus empowerment, I mean, we exist in systems that are founded on keeping countries needy and dependent. We have created wars in environments. So back to your point, absolutely, giving is not only our responsibility in order that we can alleviate the stresses. And to your point, Tim, it's not just the recipients, and certainly in my experience in Morocco and other parts of the world, if one family receives, they take personally the poverty of others and they support others. So it has ripple effect as well. Absolutely give, and it's our responsibility.
Thank you, Hana. Look, I think we could go on for another 30 minutes, but we won't, because for the simple reason that Rabbi Gabby Coltman needs to go, he told us earlier. So would you please join me in thanking such a wonderful panel discussion. I'm looking at Greg. We do run in the Institute, we run an Deakin Public Policy Forum, and this is a very good topic that we might explore further, Greg, and perhaps get in touch and provide more time.
Maybe with our panelists.
That's specifically my, yeah. So we'll be back in touch with all three of you. Okay. So now change of pace from discussions and debates to poetry recital, and it's my pleasure to invite Ms. Zainab Farah to deliver spoken word to us. Zainab is here.
I'm right here,
Yeah. Give you the microphone. I'll give you the floor.
Thank you.
It's all yours, Zainab.
Assalamu alaikum everyone. May peace and blessings be upon you all. I too, before I begin, would like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which we are gathered here today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I'd like to say that sovereignty was never ceded and treaties were never signed. It was great listening to the wonderful panel discussion about the notion of giving. Tonight, when I was trying to figure out what piece to do to sort of relate back to the theme, the reason why I went with the piece that I'm going to be doing is obviously there is the notion of giving in the sense of supporting others, you know, whether it's through money and opportunities, but there's also the notion of giving a person a chance in the sense of we do live in a multicultural society. We do come across individuals that come from different faiths, different backgrounds, that speak different languages to ourselves, that look different to ourselves, and often it is hard for some people to welcome them, to approach them in a kind manner, and just give them the chance to sort of show them who they really are. And obviously the media does not help in the sense that they do often portray certain communities and certain individuals in a negative light. So when people are meeting new people, they do meet them with sort of like some doubts in mind. So yeah, I'll just get into the piece. I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but for a person trying to hide a secret, you're doing a poor job. You're doing a poor job at concealing your contempt behind your smile. Your eyes are traitors, but don't worry. Your secret's safe with me. I'll just add it to the mountain of secrets I keep for strangers I've only met for a slight second or three. I thank you. I thank you for at least trying to hide your true emotions. For some people don't even bother hiding the disgust they feel. It's painted across their face in the brightest of colors, neon pink, neon green. See, it is for this reason that I find myself overcompensating and being excessively polite to strangers that I meet, hoping that this interaction, although short, might be the key for them to look past the monsters displayed on their screens and see that in Islam, akhlaq, good character, is an important part of my deen. And that although I'm black, the only thing I steal is a quick glance in the mirror before I leave. I mean, what would it take to see that I am no different to the average 23-year-old being? I've got struggles, hopes, and wishes to achieve my dreams. I'm tired of smiling so hard that my face gets cramped. Tired of being targeted and having to apologize for crimes I didn't commit. I'm tired of constantly apologizing to strangers who refuse to see that I am unique, individual, and that I've got my own story to share. But most of all, I'm tired of being tired. If you want to stay ignorant and refuse to look past all the messed up media and misconceptions about who I am and what I'm like, so be it. But know that I'll never allow myself to be a picture that's perfectly tuned to your stigmas and stereotypes. Instead, I'm going to create my own frame, one that suits and represents me correctly. Thank you.
Well, that's word spoken, and I won't say any more. Can I invite Ahmed to please come in and quickly...
May I also start off by acknowledging the traditional custodians upon the land which we gather and pay my respects to the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. May I also quickly acknowledge the Vice Chancellor, Professor Ian Martin, and to host his inaugural Iftar Dinner with us. So thank you and welcome to the Iftar Dinner, and it was great to have you here as our major host. May I also acknowledge our parliamentarians in the room, Mr. Frank Maguire and Neil Angus. Thank you very much for your support and your company here tonight. To our friends from the Consular Corps, thank you very much for joining us this evening. It's great to see you here. May I also just make a tribute to Professor Fethi Mansouri for his dedication and commitment to host this Iftar dinner. As he mentioned, this is our 10th year, our 10th partnership, and I always look forward to that phone call when Fethi calls up and says, what are we doing at this year's Iftar dinner? So thank you for that, and congratulations on all the work that you are doing, both for yourself and for what ADI are doing as an institute. To all the academics in the room, community leaders, community members, welcome one and all. I hope you've enjoyed tonight's Deakin University Iftar. And we have been very fortunate that we've been partnering with Deakin University for the 10th Iftar dinner. The AIS has been doing this Iftar since 2002, and this partnership between the two organisations is a testament to the community service both entities are trying to uphold. Ramadan is a time for a connection between the observer and their creator, a time to cleanse the body, enhance the spirit, and to think about where they are in life. Looking back at the year that was, there were challenges aplenty. The pandemic has unfortunately taken away lives both here and abroad, and it is still doing so. During the peak of the pandemic, we were itching to see some level of normality to be restored to our lives, as we were keen to go to the footy, the places of worship, movies, clubs, and so on. After all, we are social beings. Being social is not only about having a good time, but engaging with the other, hearing their story, looking out for them, whether they need assistance or not, is more than a display of nobility, but a primary duty of our humanity. That's why in tonight's discussion we heard our panelists talk about giving. Giving for the sake of humanity, giving to uphold equality and justice. Giving so that the recipient doesn't feel humiliated or dependent, nor should the provider feel superior, but giving out of the kindness of their heart. The words charity, sadaqah or sadaqah encourage us to give us a little from our toil for the well-being of our fellow human beings, to restore social equity, to uphold justice and give everybody a chance to pursue equality. Although it manifests in different ways across the Abrahamic traditions, ultimately they all serve the purpose, and that is to uphold a just society. For it is with justice that everyone has a level playing field and no one is deprived an opportunity to further their life's objective. It is no wonder that faith traditions have set the blueprint for the charities that exist today. And although there are many worthy causes out there, the challenge is to the community organisations to find their cause and craft their message so that it has wide-scale appeal. It should be used as a motivation for inclusion, for the advancement of humanity, and for the improvement of society and the environment. It is in holy days like the ones we have just celebrated and are celebrating, whether it be in the case of Ramadan, Easter or Orthodox Easter, which was celebrated over the weekend, Passover, the general population are reminded to give a little. But for those who are willing to make a difference in someone's life, to give regularly from their time, from their intellect, their wealth and toil, will hopefully give someone a leg up and make them ready for the next stage of their journey. So these are some of the thoughts I've been contemplating on, and I thought I'd share that in the spirit of tonight's theme. I'd like to commend Deakin University for continually setting the bar and putting on a wonderful dinner tonight. I want to thank all of you as distinguished guests for sharing this sacred time with us. You have made the Iftar more colourful and enjoyable by your presence. I want to thank all the team who worked to ensure tonight's is a success. I want to name the silent heroes, namely Lauren Abel and Jenny Banks and the ADI team, and Tanya Dean from our end for their assistance. I'd like to, again, as a form of our gratitude for hosting us tonight, I'd like to invite Professor Ian Martin to come forward, as we have a little gift we'd like to present to him.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I'll hold it like that so it doesn't keep it.
Thank you so much.
And I'd also like to just quickly say thank you to all the others who played a role here tonight. For Isa Bajawari for making the call to prayer, our panelists, Hana Assafiri, Reverend Professor Tim Costello, Rabbi Gabby Coltman, and a wonderful spoken word performance by Zeynep. Thank you for that. And obviously Professor Mansouri for his wonderful emceeing. All the caterers and staff here who are looking after us tonight, thank you very much. Thank you again for attending. Have a great evening. Hopefully next time, we'll see you again next time.
We're not finished yet.
We're not finished yet.
So can I just ask Zainab to come back here, please? I'm just going to present you with a small gift, Zainab. And you can do that. Ahmed, please. As a token of appreciation for your beautifully spoken words that you did. Just a reminder that whilst we're doing this, coffee and dessert are being served, so please feel free to keep on enjoying your meals. Yeah? Thank you. And Ahmed, no, you're not.
Yeah, I'll stay here. Okay.
Two more gifts. I think one is actually for you, so maybe that's just
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right. So we did things slightly differently tonight. So we normally actually do this right at the very conclusion of the event, but we wanted to go on with the proceedings. Coffee and dessert are being served now. But we thank you all very much for being here tonight. It's been wonderful to have you all. Thanks to the wonderful panel. I think the theme of giving and the notion of intergroup solidarity is really critical and important. We would like to continue that conversation. Reverend Tim, Hana, and Rabbi Gabby, who's left us. And thank you to all the guests from wherever you came. We really enjoyed having you here and look forward to seeing you next year. Thank you.